Korean men wear makeup. Japan and Korea take their fight for Tokyo and Takashima to the International Court of Public Opinion. I talk about running, and we take a trip to Guatemala. All this and more coming up next. The QiRanger podcast starts now. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the podcast. I am your host, Steve Miller, the internet's QiRanger, and I am jazzed to have you here today on YouTube, on QiRanger.com, and of course, via iTunes. So let's go ahead and get started with this week's news. And of course, I want to touch very briefly on Typhoon Samba, which hit on Monday of last week. And I have to say that this was probably the most rainfall I have seen this year. Now, previously to this, we did have two typhoons come through Korea and up into the North Korean area. And in the Seoul area, these were mainly non-events. So if you take a look at the way typhoons are categorized, they're pretty much the equivalent of a hurricane in the United States. In fact, the only real difference is hurricanes are over there and typhoons are over here in Asia. So if you take a look at the categorization of them, they are exactly the same. So the typhoon that most recently came up, Samba, was listed as a Category 2, which is nothing really to wave your finger at and dismiss. It is a pretty powerful storm. And those that are in the southern areas of South Korea, especially Jeju and of course Busan and some of the other coastal regions, really did feel the effects. However, once again, the media here in Seoul were, well, really playing it up a bit. And I really am starting to get a little frustrated with that because a lot of people are not really looking at the details. And when I say that, you need to take a look and know how these storms operate. So when a storm comes up, it's over fresh water. It has the ability to become a very violent storm. And that's why a lot of times when tropical depressions then become tropical storms and then a typhoon or hurricane, first to first category and blah, 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 all the way up to Category 5. Those are massive storms with winds reaching incredible speeds, drenching the area with tons of rain. But once they make landfall, then they start to weaken because they don't have the water and the access to wind to sustain them. And as soon as they make landfall, then they start dropping in their categorization until they just fizzle out. So Samba was a Category 2, meaning that it was weaker than Bolivian a few weeks before. Now, as I said, it's nothing to stop being concerned about because it is a powerful storm, and that was shown when it made landfall in the southern regions of the country. However, as it progressed up Korea along the eastern seaboard, those areas were, of course, the hardest hit because you have access to the water. You have the open space so the winds can continue to be maintained. And one of the reasons why this was a little bit more of a storm than the previous two ones is because the actual typhoon didn't really go over the land that much. It really kind of skirted this eastern seaboard. And as it made its way northern, it dropped from a Category 2 to a Category 1, which is still a pretty powerful storm. And then it went into North Korea. Now just the same as other typhoons that have moved up northernly into North Korea, there were more floods and more issues and probably more deaths, which is really unfortunate. But here in Seoul, the amount of rain we saw was the most significant I had seen all year. All day it rained and just drenched everything in its path. It was not fun. And hopefully this is the last typhoon. It's been one of the wettest summers on record here most recently, which also kind of comes as a relief because of how dry the first part of the year was. And now that we have received so much water, now there's concern that the crops are not only going to be bad because of the drought earlier this year, but because of so much rain so quickly now. It's a huge problem. You want the rain on one hand, but on the other hand, when you get it in such enormous amounts that's also detrimental to the soil and the crops. So that is the latest news on typhoons here in the area. But let's talk about Japan and Korea with regards to Dokdo and Takashima. Now, over the years, Korea has taken out many ads that a lot of people have thought was really a waste of money. In the Wall Street Journal, they placed a full-page ad saying Dokdo is Korean territory. And to Koreans, it's a very passionate issue, and a lot of us that have been in Korea for a long time understand that. We understand the passion behind it. We understand the importance of globally recognizing Dokdo as Korean territory. However, if you're in the United States and you open up the Wall Street Journal, you have no clue what Dokdo is. Why is there this full-page ad in front of me? It makes absolutely no sense. And if you're at a Korean performance and all of a sudden, as they have done in the past, Dokdo is ours, Dokdo is Korean territory, it's completely out of place. There's no context for it. And now Japan is starting to take out ads in their own national newspapers claiming that Takashima is traditionally Japanese land. And this is going to probably deteriorate some of the relationships even more between the two countries, because historically Japan has been indoctrinating the elementary school textbooks with Takashima and how it is Japanese territory. So with these extra adverts, it's going to really butt the heads of the politicians between the two countries. And again, to what end? This is such a small piece of land, and while there is an enormous amount of natural resource, natural gas below, it's not what should be defining the two countries and their relationship. It's one small piece that is being put ahead of everything else that the two countries can do in terms of working together to move forward, to stabilize the area, and to really improve the business and safety of everyone in the region. Neither country really wants to back down. Neither country wants to lose face. In fact, the United States has come out and said, Japan, just back off. Korea has occupied the land. If you take it to the International Court of Justice, they're going to win because it's closer to Korea. They occupy it. You've acquiesced that. The historical documents say that it's Korean territory. Japanese documents even call it Korean territory. So just back off. Just acquiesce it completely and stop putting up a fight. I really don't know what is ultimately going to come about with this. However, I have recently spoken to a number of Koreans here in the land of the morning calm, and while they all believe it is an important national issue, they're starting to realize that on the global stage, really it's an issue only for Japan, only for Korea, and that the global audience doesn't care. And they really aren't going to care because most people can't see why they're fighting over two small islets, especially when Korea is on the ground. So hopefully within the next 5 years, before the Olympics, I really pray that before the 2018 Olympics, this matter is completely settled. President Lee Myung-bak is, well, he's in some trouble. Now, he is, of course, on his way out. The national elections for the president presidency in South Korea is just around the corner, so he is essentially a lame duck. Now, he has been beriddled with conspiracy and corruption charges in his cabinet, in his family. And now the ruling Sanury party says that it is going to establish an independent body to conduct special investigations to everyone in his family, other powerful figures that he has put in place, to just get rid of all the corruption. And I think that is a bold move, because no one likes corruption in government. And unfortunately, a lot of times, and it's not unique to South Korea, because you see it in the United States, you see it in other countries around the world, when people have power, they like to grease the wheels a little bit, and stuff gets done that really shouldn't. Lee Myung-bak also says that it is inevitable that North and South Korea will unify, and I actually agree with that statement that he put out as well. Probably because it's looking long-term in the future. If you look at South Korea, if you look at North Korea, they really are one people, one identity. Political ideology aside, they are one people with a shared history. The division of the country only came about as a result of World War II and Soviet Union in the north, United States in the south, neither country wanting to lose that foothold in Asia. So you have at that time just the 38th parallel, which is now the DMZ at the conclusion of, I shouldn't say the conclusion, the armistice of the Korean War. But over time, I really do believe that as the global economy evolves, as we as a species determine what it really means to be a global society, these differences in economies, in political ideologies, will slowly fade away. And North Korea will become on par, on parity with South Korea, so that the economies are equal. And then at that time, you can look at having normal and bilateral relationships with the North, and finally, a unified South Korea. Until then, I really don't think it's wise or worth really spending a lot of resources on. In fact, many Koreans that I speak to also agree, saying that they really don't want to unify with the North because of the economic disparity between the two countries. If they were to unite right now, there would be so much money, time, and resources dumped into the North that it would actually decimate the South Korean economy, and no one wants to see that. So I think that's really the direction things are going to take here in the future, and I agree with the president absolutely on that. Some other news that came out really recently that I thought was fascinating was regarding college graduates here in South Korea. It said that nearly 60,000 college graduates are not able to find work after completing their degree. And now the government is saying skip college. And this is because the education market is very tough, and so many students strive for that perfect rating. I've commented this a number of times, both on the podcast and on vlogs, that if you're seen getting a 97%, which would be an A+, an exceptional grade, it's seen as a mark of failure. So there simply aren't enough jobs for these top caliber individuals. So nearly all high school grads are trying so desperately to get these hard grades that everyone on paper is the perfect candidate. And if you only have one spot, one opening in your company, what do you do? Really, what do you do to ensure all these top-notch candidates can get a job? And I also see the dedication towards perfection in a stark contrast to what I see in the United States, because a lot of it, in terms of college behavior, is not so much put on getting the 4.0 grade point average. I mean, that is an effort, but also the importance of, as you can hear the university administrator in me right now, becoming a well-rounded individual, having the background to adapt and to work effectively in the business place. Many complaints from businesses have said that college grads are worthless, meaning that they have to spend so much time and money to retrain them that the government's position of going to the workplace, bypassing college, getting that training, focus on what you want to do, and then take the so-called non-traditional route, going back to university to get that specialized degree, to get that specialized training, would make the workforce and the employers better off. And as a result, the person, the individual, be better off. And I have to agree with that. As I look at my university students, they are so green. They're really having the first opportunity to experience some academic freedom. And it's a brand new concept. A lot of times, you still have to give such clear and precise instructions that if you don't do that, they're left at a little bit of a loss. And I can see how that would be a big problem in the workplace, because a lot of times there really aren't set procedures for when things go a little So you have to be able to think on your feet and adapt and think creatively. And for a lot of students, that's a huge challenge. So if you take an individual out of high school and they get OJT, on-the-job training, and they become an exceptional person at their skill set, then they can go to university. They can get the degree that would enable them to move up in the company, get the degree that would accentuate their responsibilities there, and really eliminate a lot of the training that companies have to do. I really have to agree that this is probably a really good idea on paper. It remains to be seen how well it would be implemented because of the status of education in this country. Having a degree is something that's very, very important. And if you don't have it, you may not get past the screeners when your resume floats across the desk. So I like the idea. I like the sentiment. I'm not really sure it's going to go anywhere. Some other news out of South Korea. I mentioned the sex offender last week. The country has said that it is going to strengthen and toughen its policy towards sex offenders in Korea by expanding the chemical castration policies. And I say kudos to that, especially when it concerns sex offenders and minors. This is going to be applied not only now, but also retroactively, so that those incarcerated now will also have to serve that. In North Korean news, apparently it is now okay to eat pizza and for women to wear pants. Previously, those two things were not permitted. I thought that was pretty funny. In some other legal news, a Chinese fisherman who killed a Korean law enforcement officer, I believe he was possibly with the Coast Guard, when they went into Korean waters. He was originally sentenced to 30 years in prison for this act. But while in prison, he's been very remorseful, and his sentence has been reduced to 23 years and has been ordered to pay a 20 million won blood money fine to the family. In some other international news, South Korea is taking the issue of comfort women to the UN General Assembly to try and really force Japan's hand into publicly acknowledging and making amends for their action. Now, the Prime Minister Noda over in Japan has come out recently saying that there is no evidence that Japanese military officials ever used women for sex slaves during the occupation of the nation, which is in stark contrast to a lot of the first-person stories and documents here in the country, which has sparked a lot of controversy here in the nation. This isn't the first time that Korea has done this, and the reason why they're doing this now is really because of Japan's tendency to whitewash a lot of historical references, and especially with this issue with a lot of the women becoming advanced in age and slowly dying out. I'm not sure what is going to happen, but like all things these days, a lot can happen in the court of public opinion. And even Secretary Clinton from the United States has come out and said that this is an issue that is important and that no woman should ever be subjugated into sexual slavery during an occupation. Some other issues that came out, some other studies recently that are quite surprising. Koreans work the longest hours in a study of developed nations. Koreans average 44.6 hours per week. However, that extra work does not translate directly into more money in their pockets. They only average the middle of the road in terms of salary, and they do so with about 10% fewer in the workforce. So reason would really stand that if you're working more with fewer people, you should be making above the average around the world. And well, that's not happening. And in the opener, I mentioned that men in Korea are wearing makeup. Yes, $400 million is spent annually on makeup, and it's something I unfortunately see all the time. And I have to say, real men do not wear makeup. They do not wear eyeliner. Sure, if you're in a play, sure, if you're in a movie, a music video, something where you have to look a certain way to play a role or to have lights or something on you. When I go on TV, we wear makeup. You got to deal with the shine of the bald head. But to go out in public with blush, with some actual accessories to give you cheek structure, and really, guys, eyeliner. Come on now. I just don't see it. But there was this, the best example I have of this, there was this gentleman, and Joe and I were walking down Gangnam style, yeah. We were walking down Gangnam Street, Gangnam Row, and there was this gentleman. He had makeup, but that wasn't all that he had. He had these, I want to say these red shoes, almost like Converse type shoes, but these red shoes, some skinny black jeans. He had a pink sweater tied around his neck. He had white lensless glasses because apparently in Asia, and it's not only here in Korea, but I've seen this around the Asian area, a lot of people really like wearing glasses. So what they'll do is, because they want the look, they'll wear the frames but no lenses inside. Coming from the West, where we want to just get rid of our glasses, it blows me away. Anyway, white lensless glasses and a little hat, and he was walking around with a little man bag as well. And it wasn't like a merce; it was a big Louis Vuitton purse. I could not believe it, walking down the street, and that was just normal. That's fashion. And I really don't get it. I don't understand why men are called to spend that kind of money on things that they really don't need. I'm all for looking good, looking sharp, even though I don't. But makeup is, I think, taking it too far. So, ladies and gentlemen, that is the news this week from South Korea. It is time once more for the Content Rewind, and it's been, well, I wouldn't say a slow week, but a very busy week personally for me, even though there hasn't been a lot of content online. So, Tuesday's video, yes, the royal tombs. I have to say I was really pleased with the way that the video came out, and I really have to give some props to the Cultural Heritage Association for really coming through once more and setting us up with an English guide. And Unre really was fantastic. She actually was teaching at an English camp earlier in the day. She met us out there. We were running a few minutes late because of some of the construction along the roads. We spent 2 hours with her and then another 2 hours walking around Yeonganung. And I have to say, it was a very awesome experience, because a lot of times when you go to these royal tombs, there is someone usually assigned to them all that have necessary documents in English. There's always the brochure there, but maybe not an English guide every single day. So I called in advance, made the appointment, we were there. And I thought, well, okay, so we're going to go there, and she's going to be able to tell us about the tombs. I let her know ahead of time that I really wanted to know about the conservation efforts regarding the tombs. And I wasn't prepared for what she brought. And Joe has a great picture of this. She brought this binder that was just filled with historical documents and photos of historical documents. The amount of information that she had was amazing. And it was even a little bit more amazing to me because she really knew her stuff. And when I say she knew her stuff, she grew up at, in an older time in Korea where they actually really did study the Chinese characters. And she can read fluently the Mandarin characters that were in a lot of the historical documents. So as we're going through and asking questions, she'll open a page to this book, and it's all in Chinese characters, and she just starts reading a blah, 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 and then being able to translate it right into English. Having access to that kind of knowledge is exactly why I did this series this month. This has been by far one of the most rewarding series and journalistic projects I've ever worked on. Having the opportunity to speak with folks at the Palace Museum in week 1, going behind the scenes to the preservation rooms last week, going to the tombs and speaking with someone who's just as passionate about history and culture and the preservation as I am, and having access to all of her research was just tremendous. It was so much fun. We learned so much by walking around. As I said, we spent probably 4 hours at the tombs. It's fantastic. We'll probably come back and do another tomb type series because the way that the tombs are laid out, there's actually different types of tombs. You have singles, doubles, side by sides. I really find that the ways that they're constructed is also interesting. There's a great exhibit at the Palace Museum that maybe I can work with to get some video footage or photos from that. It's fantastic. The intricacies of the tombs and the way that the processions go through, how they follow the Confucian ideology is just amazing. So that's really the story behind that video. It's a lot of fun. Next week, in fact, I'm recording this on Thursday of this week. On Friday, we're going to Sungnaemun, Namdaemun, National Treasure number 1. It's not open to the public. We're going inside. So you'll be able to see that next week, in just a couple of days after the podcast drops. I can't wait. It's going to be epic. It's going to be awesome. And what a way to end a 4-part series. Fantastic. On Friday's video, we talked about opening a samgak kimbap, one of my favorite snacks. And I have to give props to Mr. Lawson out there, Zachary Lawson. He gave me the idea of that because I met him for coffee one day with his wife and son, and we had a little discussion about some of the difficulties he had in opening because I will be honest, I'd seen them before, and in 2008 I bought one and I flubbed up opening it like nobody's business. I always tore off pieces of the laver. I never knew what order to pull it in. Even though I could see it 1, 2, 3, it just made no sense to me. So I thought it would be a fun little Friday video to throw out there and just really show in either in pictures or in video how to open one of these, because there are a lot of people are coming to South Korea, are going to Japan, and that is a very common snack. In fact, that particular snack, the samgak kimbap, was the one thing I was really craving in addition to kimchi when I was in the United States this summer, because you can go into any convenience store here in Korea and pick one up for 700, 800 won. It's a great snack, about 400 or 500 calories. If you get one of the larger ones. Meat, rice, they're easily digestible. It's fantastic. The wrapper is easy to toss away. You eat the essential wrapper, the kim. It's wonderful, and I love it as a snack. It's wonderful, and more people should take the time to eat them, I think. That's my opinion anyway. Speaking of kimchi, Olive Show on Wednesday of last week. I was on Delicious Olive Show on Olive TV. It's network sponsored, or I guess run by CJ and Eth, and the network that brings you Master Chef Korea and Top Gear Korea. And they invited me on to do, well, it started off to be a number of different cooking options. We finally settled on kimchi because I have a genuine love for the fermented cabbage. It is absolutely delicious, and you'll see one of my fun uses of it in a blog post next week on Friday. But I love kimchi, and I had such a great time with the crew. It was so much fun sitting out and making kimchi all day, making kimchi jjigae, making boiled pork. It was fantastic. It aired twice on Olive TV network. They're supposed to be sending me the MP3 or MP4 of the video that goes along with it, and I'm going to try and put it up as a podcast video extra once I get that set. But it was a lot of fun. The funny thing that came about with setting this up, Olive Show contacted me during the summer while we were in the United States. So for a number of weeks, we're going back and forth trying to find a filming date when we're going to do things. And then finally we got back here and we'd set up a date to meet and to shoot. And then I had to pick up some extra classes at the university, so it then delayed the shooting a little bit. Then we had to find a location because we're making kimchi, and kimchi is an all-day process. But I'll talk about that in a little bit. Kimchi is an all-day process. You need 6-7 hours to do it. And plus we're filming, so there's makeup, there's wardrobe changes. You have to bring people in. We have cameras all over the place. So then we had to find a location. We settled in Hongdae. And then we got the script, and the script, the first time I read it, it was pretty funny. Fabian, he's from France, and the script called for me basically to say, oh, I'm a famous YouTuber. I make internet videos, and I saw Fabian on the internet. I'm gonna go to his house. And I said, no, that makes me sound like a stalker. Fabian and I had a really good laugh about the way the script was written. So I changed it up to the way it was entered about how I make YouTube videos about Korea. I saw him on the internet, and that I thought I would visit him to see what kind of delicious trouble we could cook up together. So it wasn't quite as stalkerish, even though the scene in the episode is essentially him at quote-unquote home, and I'm knocking on the door and burst in to show him my kimchi. So we made kimchi. It was a lot of fun. And one of the things that really blew me away, through the magic of television, we didn't have to soak the kimchi. The first step when you make beichu kimchi, the cabbage kimchi, is to salt and soak your kimchi for about 6 hours. And it's really one of the things that Joe and I really dislike doing in terms of making kimchi, because it just takes so much time, and you have these huge tubs all over your house with the cabbage soaking in it. Well, I found out through this show while we were filming that you can buy pre-soaked and pre-salted kimchi. And that has absolutely rocked my world. To know that I can essentially now just have my chili paste, have my ginger, have my garlic, have my radish, combine those ingredients, maybe throw in some spring onions and some carrots, and throw that in there and have my kimchi without having to wait 6 hours to salt and soak. I'm sold. That's the way we're going to do it from here on out, and we are always going to have some rockin' kimchi in the house, because I love making kimchi jjigae. It's easy enough to go out and buy the store-bought brand, but being able to make it yourself, being able to customize things, because one of the things that I don't add to my kimchi is, of course, the fish sauce. I don't add any oyster sauce. I don't add any seafood ingredients, because I'm not really fond of how that tastes, even though it pretty much gets obscured because of all the red pepper you put in it, but also because my family has an allergy to shellfish, and I really don't want to take the chance of me making some exquisite kimchi and find out that I'm getting allergic to eating it because I put in some oysters, or I put in some shrimp or something else. So that's why I leave it out. But it was a lot of fun. It was a great experience. I love working with the crew on Olive Show. Everyone was so much fun to work with. We had a great time, a great lunch, a great coffee session at the end. It was just a fantastic day. And again, thank you so much for inviting me on the show. I was also on Catch the Wave Friday night, my monthly appearance with Adrian Lee over at Arirang Radio, where we talked about, well, the series on YouTube, Making Kimchi, and my passion for running as of late, which is going to lead us to the Quintessential Quartet, because I'm going to talk about running this week. So there you have it this week. Not a lot of vlogs on my personal channel just because I have been out filming so much, but if you have a question and would like me to address it in the future, feel free to drop me a note at questions@QiRanger.com. I'll be happy to write a personal response to you or make a video response. So there you have it. That is the Content Rewind this week. Ladies and gentlemen, it is time for the Quintessential Quartet. And this week we are going to talk about running, and specifically the reasons why I like to run, because I'm getting a lot of questions as I have started announcing some of the projects that are in the works for me in the next year. So let's talk about why I like to run. Number one, I just can't sit still. I need to be doing something. I need to be moving. And this is really apparent while we're on vacation. I know people who, when they go on vacation, they love to sit with a book on the beach and maybe with a tasty adult beverage. And that's their vacation. And there's nothing wrong with that. But for me, that's an hour or two, and then I have to get up and do something. I need to go hiking. I need to go biking. I need to go, motocross riding. I need to go scuba diving. I have to do some activity. And I really think that I really have found that niche of why running fits well with me, because I work so much on the computer, writing and editing, that every chance I get, I want to be outdoors. So running allows me 30 minutes, an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours of being outside doing something. And I come back really feeling refreshed. And it generally makes me feel good down in the core, at the core of my being able to do that just makes me happy. And there are a lot of times when it's raining here and I'm trapped inside. You have that stir-crazy cabin fever sensation. So I can't go outside because it's just pouring rain outside. So I'll find something to do here, some kind of physical activity or something to take my mind off just sitting down. I just can't read. I have to be moving, and that's one of the reasons why I run. I also use the running time, this is number 2, as personal thinking time. And I never really realized how much I rely on that time running to think. I'm currently running about 9 kilometers as my standard run, and I use that to zone out. And when I say zone out, I mean to put the outside world behind me. I know a lot of distance runners and a lot of friends will listen to podcasts, listen to audio books while they run. And I simply can't do that. I need my thoughts to be clear, to be open. I find that if I'm listening to a talk show or if I'm listening to a podcast or a book, I start slowing down. I start focusing on the spoken words, and I'm losing track of what I'm doing. So I usually have my headphones on, but playing uplifting fast music so I can keep my pace up. But also, I really don't pay attention to what's playing. I may, at some level of my consciousness, know what song is playing, but it's not really, oh, this is the song I'm singing along every step of the way. But during the time I run, I actually usually think about voiceovers or podcasts or things that I need to be doing. And I use that as a special time to script things out, to think about how I want to do things. So a lot of times, especially with the voiceover work I'm doing for the projects, the Tuesday videos, I'll actually go out for a run, think about the video, think what needs to be done, and then start crafting the voiceover on the run. And when I come back home, start writing out the notes. So then I'm ready to go and record on the mic, upload and edit the video, and it really works well. It's a great mesh for me. I love it. Number 3 on my list of why I run is because I'm looking at it as a challenge. Now, before, I never used to be able to run. And I mean never. When I was in school, I was okay sprinter, but long distance, forget about it. My average my average mile run in PE class was 10 minutes plus, which is bloody slow. In fact, that was the grade of C, barely passing, when I was being evaluated by my gym teachers. So I just thought, hey, I'm not a runner. In fact, while I was in the United States, I tried running distances, and I found that my body wasn't doing it, I guess, right, because I was always having ankle and knee problems, and I always told myself, well, I can never run a half marathon, I can never run a marathon because my body can't take it, my knees can't take it, or making up some excuse. And part of that is true, but the really rationale behind it, or not say rationale, the reason behind it was because I wasn't training properly. Because now I'm running 9K every day, essentially, no problem. 3 days on, a day of rest, another 3 days, no problem. And I'm having a great time with it. But previously to the summer, I wanted to extend my distance a lot, and I did hurt myself. And I really think that's because of 2 reasons. Number 1, I was obsessed with time. Not so much the distance, but the time. I always wanted to run faster and faster and faster. If you follow me on Facebook or Twitter, sometimes I post my run meter material on there. And you can see how I guess, compete with myself. You have my average, but you also have how I am on that particular route, my time and distance for that route, and how I compete over all the runs on that route, whether it's above the median, below the median, the worst or the best run. And I love having that because it's a great motivator to me in terms of keeping my pace up, because even though my mindset has now changed to focus on the distance, I am cognizant of how fast I run, because I don't want it to be super, super slow. I always want to be at least around the median, and every chance I get that I can actually improve, I would like to do that as well. So this year, after I recovered from my injury, I decided to set out and said, you know what? I've always wanted to do a half marathon. It's 13.1 miles, 21.1 kilometers. I would love to do one. I have no desire to sign up for a race, but I can run here in Dongtan, I can find a loop, and boom, I can run that distance. And I mapped it all out. I have all my distances. I have all my loops set so I can do that kind of race. And I've really enjoyed it. My goal right now is to complete a half marathon distance before the end of November. And actually, I think it's around the 3rd week of November I'll be able to complete that distance. And then continue training for a 50K ultra marathon in May. And I'm looking at probably doing that along the Han River, starting, say, Jamsil, going out to Gimpo, crossing the bridge, and coming back the other side. I need to really map out that distance so I have an idea of where I want to do the run, where's the best place to start, and of course, the logistics of support along the way. Because running a distance of that long, you need some people to help you with water, with food, salt, to make sure that you do it safely. I really don't want to just go out there and say, hey, all right, start. And as I know the date and as I approach with the actual route, I think I will invite people, hey, do you want to come out and run with me that day? You don't have to run the 50K. You can run 2K, 5K. You can bike with me. You can just have fun along that day and have it just be a fun experience. So I'm looking forward to that. And once I complete the the half marathon here in November, my goal is to run about 10 miles a day, 16 kilometers, 4 or 5 days a week. So running 40, 50 miles a week through the holidays, maybe not while we're on vacation, but who knows. And then gearing up training, and hopefully I have this urge right now to run a 500K race. That's right, 500K, 310 miles. It's a burning desire. My vision for this is really 10 days of 50K. So it's a 10-day excursion, 50K a day. It's going to be down in the future, but I really want to try and make that happen. That's one of the reasons why I run. It's a strange obsession. Adrian Lee over at QiRanger Radio was asking me, why do you want to run 50K? Why do you want to run the ultra marathon? And I told him honestly, a marathon is 42.2K. It's hard to say. Yeah, you can say marathon, but 42.2K. Anything over that is an ultra marathon. And 50 sounds such nicer rolling off the tongue. So those are the big three reasons. But the fourth reason really is personal to me. And the fourth reason is that it reminds me of my father. Now, he passed away in 1991, and he had some hypertension. And to help him maintain his physical fitness, he ran. And I would always look at him and his dedication to that. He used to run just 4 miles a day, which is nothing to laugh at or diminished when you're talking about longer distances. 4 miles is an incredible amount of time and distance to do that day in and day out, 5, 6, 7 days a week. And even if you're just running 1 mile, that's an incredible achievement to have the dedication to do that on a consistent basis. But when I'm running, there's just some kind of connection that I feel to my father, and I really enjoy that time of being out on the pavement through the trails that I sometimes run on, of having that a bond with him, and being able to remember seeing him set off going around the neighborhood and then seeing him come back. Yeah, so that's the fourth reason. That's why I run, is that it really reminds me of my father, and to lose him so many years ago, and to have a way for me to connect with him now so many years later is just really special to me, and it's really one of the reasons why I do it. Ladies and gentlemen, it is time once more to set course for adventure. And this week I am joined not by one, but by two intrepid travelers who circle the globe. I am joined by Matt Stabile and Luke Armstrong from the Expeditioner.com. See, I put it in there for you, Luke. Gentlemen, welcome to the podcast.
Yo, what's up, Steve?
Oh, it's a beautiful...
Good to be here, Steve.
I'm glad to have you guys. It is a beautiful day here in South Korea. Now, where are you two calling in from today?
Yeah, 2 different locations. I am in the beautiful borough of Brooklyn, New York.
And then I am in Bismarck, North Dakota right now.
Bismarck, North Dakota.
Exciting Bismarck, North Dakota. Yeah, this is probably the biggest thing that's happened, like tourism-wise, this podcast ever.
So gentlemen,
Brooklyn and Bismarck, they're basically sister cities, aren't they?
Yeah, they really are.
Very similar.
Very, very exciting locations. So, gentlemen, where are we going to be talking about this week?
Yeah, so we are going to be speaking about Guatemala. The reason that you are having 2 podcasters here is I run a site called The Expeditioner. Luke is one of our editors there, and for the entire time I knew him, he lived in Guatemala. He was a director of a volunteer organization that he can speak about, and I actually went down there and finally visited him about a month before he left. So we spent about 2 weeks together exploring all of the country, or at least a good portion of it.
So Luke, you lived there for 4 years. Yeah. What is your general impression about Guatemala? And just so you know, I'm a coffee lover, and I love Guatemalan coffee. So any nuggets, any gems you can share about Guatemalan coffee, I would love to hear about.
Yeah, like I could definitely weave that into it. I think my general impression, it's different now than if you were to ask me a year ago, than it would have been 2 years ago. It's kind of this, I guess, always evolving and changing thing, because the country is so different, and the culture is so varying, and it kind of really depends on what angle you're looking at it from. I obviously was a foreigner. I had the expat angle, but then also I was working with the impoverished populations there, which typically tended to be Mayan and indigenous. So it is, whereas I'm from the United States and we kind of have this melting pot culture, there it's kind of like there's cultures within the Guatemalan culture that are starkly divided. You have the wealthy class, which tend to be of Spanish descent, and then you have the poor and indigenous class, and then you also have some of the best coffee in the world, which is produced there in the highlands, which most of, I guess, the best coffee is actually, it's harder to find a good cup of coffee in Guatemala because a lot of it gets shipped up north to like Starbucks and places like that.
Oh, really? That's surprising. I would have figured that there would have been some kind of local entities that would kind of promote the farmers and help them out more. That's a shame, because Guatemalan coffee is fantastic.
It is, and I, there definitely is that down there, but I guess what I was getting at, what I found fascinating, which I only recently found out, is when you visit some of these coffee farmers, some of them don't drink coffee at all, so they're harvesting like the best coffee in the world, and then you ask them, like, do you like coffee? What type of coffee do you like? And they're like, oh, we don't drink coffee.
That's just sick and wrong. That's just sick and wrong. Coffee, nectar of the gods.
That is the biggest problem facing the country, in my view, as well, because I also love a good cup of coffee.
Oh, okay. So I have to ask, so you spent 4 years there, and then you mentioned originally you had like the expat view, and it changed over time. So what kind of changes to your own perspective or the way you looked at things evolved as you stayed there?
I think I definitely approached the issues with the populations there from my own experience, and it's kind of a land of always asking why and then never really getting a satisfactory answer. Like, there's just all these mysteries that seem to be just floating about, and it's hard to really get at the truth for anything. And maybe a specific example would be probably the thing I did down there that gained the most notoriety was open a malnourished infant center. And our first 2 weeks that it was opened, we had a wonderful center, a great staff that was fully trained, and our only problem was we didn't have any malnourished infants there. And it's a country that has the second highest malnourishment rates in the Western Hemisphere. So we were definitely doing something wrong if we couldn't find any malnourished infants that needed intervention to essentially save their lives. So what really was the problem is we were working in this one village called Santa Maria de Jesus, and we had identified 5 infants there that really needed some sort of help or they weren't going to make it. And the mothers would just tell us no, and we'd be like, look, your baby might die if it doesn't come in. It really needs that help. And they would just say no. And that didn't make any sense. And when it really got to the bottom of it was that there was a rumor going around this circle of mothers that the only reason we wanted their children to go there and be fed was because we wanted to fatten them up and then eat them, like make soup out of them. Which, from my perspective, it sounds like I'm making a dark joke and failing to land it, because it just sounds so outlandish and ridiculous. But it was those types of things that you would just ask why, and finally sometimes you would get to the bottom of it and it'd be like, oh, you want, I was speaking to them like I speak to you, or I would speak to Matt, which is kind of this. It has this, our speech intrinsic this Western logic to it, whereas down there that's, in some of the poorer population, it's just completely there. It doesn't exist, that Western logic and way of communicating. So all it takes is who's the most convincing. One of these mothers probably wanted to come up with a story, because moms are wonderful storytellers. And so her story was, they're going to eat your babies, and that's the story that stuck, which was more interesting than they want to help your babies.
Sure. That's fascinating. I
To
mean,
be fair, Luke, we had no good babies when we were down there.
Yeah, those places are expensive.
Yeah.
We were on a budget. Yeah.
I can't believe this is going into baby eating already.
well, we'll segue out of it. We'll segue out of this. So you went down there, and Matt, you went down for 2 weeks. What do you think is the best way of getting into Guatemala? You know, do you fly directly from, like, say, United States, or are there other avenues of getting into the country that are?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the biggest draw to Guatemala, and I heard it over and over there, was like half the people I met, I was like, well, how'd you end up in Guatemala? And they were like, well, it's the cheapest flight I found to Central America. And it is, like, especially I came from New York, and it was like 3 something and change, and that's like by far the cheapest place to go. I think maybe Panama, just because it's a hub, is a little more expensive, but it's by far the easiest way to get there. I mean, I don't know, maybe you can take a bus through Mexico, but the flight is really super fast. I mean, you're there, I think it was like, 6 hours from New York, Luke? Something like that, 6 to 8 hours, so it's a really quick flight.
Yeah, and you can go there direct from, like, LA, New York, Atlanta, so there's a lot of major airports that have direct flights into Guatemala. Miami's also one.
Okay, and then once in country, as far as traveling about, what are some of the best ways to, you know, see Guatemala once you're on the ground?
Yeah, well, I know one thing is when you fly in, you fly into Guatemala City, and I was visiting Luke in Antigua. And Antigua is like the epitome of like the expat central. There's all the volunteer organizations there, Peace Corps. There's something like 80 Spanish schools there. You know, so it's like where everybody ends up, at least to start off. And I think it's kind of like the safest introduction to the country, especially if you see Guatemala City. It's not exactly like this pristine area. So if you get to get into Antigua, that's where you really meld into there. And it's about an hour bus ride. When you get into the airport, you literally grab your bag, walk outside, and there's about 50 guys there that will offer you taxi rides or shared buses to Antigua. I think that's the best way. Other than that, it's you know, a typical Latin American country in the sense that there's plenty of mini buses and buses that go all around the country directly, and you'll have no problem getting there.
Okay. And once you're there, what about places to stay? I mean, what kind of accommodations are available for tourists?
Yeah. Luke, you can speak to that.
Okay, yeah, you can really, if you're looking for, you know, a $6 a night hostel with shared dorms beds, those are all over the place. If you're looking for, you know, a cheap private room, those probably run about $20 to $30. But then if you want to get up into the high range, $80 to, you know, up to $200, you can get like 5-star luxury class. The best hotels there is Hotel Santo Domingo. It's in the ruins of a former convent, so you got 16th century Spanish colonial architecture. Every night they have all these beautiful walkways with gardens that they line with candles. It's like $150 for a room there, but the rooms are just absolutely beautiful and gorgeous, and for the price you're getting an amazing deal.
That sounds fantastic. Now, since you stayed for so long, where did you stay while you were doing your charitable work there? Luke? Did we lose Luke?
My first 2 weeks I stayed with a host family, which was... Oh, yeah. Am I here?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're here. Go ahead.
Good. Yeah, my first 2 weeks I stayed with a host family, and then I ended up just renting out a house with a woman from New York who was working as a bartender, and then one of my coworkers who was running our anti-human trafficking program. So people that stay there a month or longer generally get apartments and share them, or get houses with other expats, other travelers, and price-wise, it's pretty moderate. It ends up being, you know, $10 a day probably. So rent's pretty cheap.
Oh, that is pretty cheap. That's a smoking deal as well. In terms of being there and consuming just fantastic food, what are some great dishes that people who haven't been to Guatemala should kind of take a look at and experience firsthand?
The local food tends to be, you get like tamales, rice and beans is kind of the staple down there. If you're looking for really, really good food, probably one of the best places in Antigua, Guatemala is a place called called Panza Verde. And Panza Verde is a name for people that live in Guatemala. It basically means it's a joke because a bunch of people from Antigua eat avocados a lot. So like somewhere along the lines in the 1700s, they started calling them green stomachs. Yeah, so that place has this Mayan soup, they call it, which has kind of all the Guatemalan staples, which is absolutely probably one of the best dishes I've ever had. Other than that, there's a lot of street food where you can eat like the locals, which is cheap and delicious.
So, in terms of street food, what is your best recommendation for street food?
Well, my best recommendation when I told our volunteers was not to eat it, but if you are interested in wanting to eat it, you really want to look at the guys, how much reserve food that they have. Mm-hmm. And I think the ones that have the least amount of food are the ones that have the higher turnover, so have a less of a chance of possibly getting you sick. I always got the tamales. Those are usually pretty good, and they'd be filled with whatever. They're not boring. Each street vendor has their own type of tamales. There's a woman named Doña Edna in the Antigua market where if you get a chance to try her carne asada, you're going to have to do some asking around. Ask the cab drivers what Doña Edna's booth is in the market, and they will point you there. And I'm not sure what she's putting in her food, but it's amazing.
Oh, I think it was crack cocaine.
That's pretty funny.
I did that every time I ate that.
And in terms of some locations to visit, some activities to do while in country, what would you recommend for people traveling down to Guatemala?
I can kind of take that one because I try to basically condense it into 2 weeks. Big thing to do in Antigua, obviously there's like a lot of the old ruins there, a lot of the old cathedrals and churches, but a big thing is to do volcano hiking. I know as a gringo from New York, it's not something I do on a normal basis, but there are at least 3 volcanoes right there that you can hike, and there's some within like an hour distance. Basically every hostel and hotel will offer rides there with a guide. It's really, really fun though. It's amazing, and it's the coolest reaction when you get back to wherever you are and say, oh yeah, I hiked a volcano when I was in Guatemala. That's a great activity. Luke and I headed north from Antigua into the northern part of the country to an area called, to a location called Samuk Champay, which is this amazing site. It's a natural limestone pool area set in a ravine with like these 2 towering hillsides around you, and you can take a hike over the hillside and come down into the limestone cliffs, into limestone pools. You kind of swim there for like a couple hours. And then obviously the other big site that a lot of people go to Guatemala for is Tikal, which is in the very northern part of the country in the jungle area. And that was the old Mayan capital. And you could literally spend a week there. It's a huge, massive complex. And this is the temples. Now this 2012, when they talk about the end of the Mayan calendar, they always show like the famous temple, and that's in Tikal there, and it's an amazing site there.
Right. Anything to add, Luke?
Yeah, I've heard it said, I'm not recommending you do this, but that if you quote-unquote tip the guards, they'll let you stay overnight in the park and sleep on top of the Mayan temples.
Oh. Yeah, there's greasing the wheel sometimes enables you to do things not necessarily on the books. Any traveling tips for listeners going to Guatemala?
In terms of safety, you really it is a place you want to watch out. And Antigua does have a reputation of being very safe. I think that's true in terms of there's not a lot of people being like murdered or stabbed on a regular basis, but I think that reputation also makes people a lot more complacent than they should be. Basically every day we hear about somebody who, had their backpack stolen from them at gunpoint. So that is very common, and it's sort of the same advice you take anywhere you travel. Don't go to dark alleys alone at night, and don't get drunk and, saunter about the streets and stuff like that. So just you really want to be aware of your surroundings and your possessions at all times.
Yeah, and I think what I would add was one of the biggest surprises I had about the country was I was figuring, I don't really know much about it. I'll probably spend a couple of weeks like hanging out in Antigua where everybody else is and having a good time. And there's so much to do in the country. I mean, when I was there, we went to Lake Atilan, which is a volcanic lake a few hours from Antigua. We went to Samuk Champay, went north to Tikal. I spent a day in Guatemala City on the way back. I mean, there's a lot to see in the country, and I think perhaps probably people stay a little too long in Antigua just because it's a little safer area, and that's probably they're visiting people there. So I would definitely recommend get out. There's a lot to the country, and you just don't realize it.
It has highlands, it has lowlands, it has Caribbean beaches, Pacific beaches, a wetland type area, desert type area, rainforest. It's got almost like all of the tropical climate zones that exist in that one country.
Okay. In terms of traveling around the country, would you recommend exchanging, say, dollars or euros for the local currency, or can you get a better deal traveling with taxis and so forth if you're using the foreign currency?
Most places accept dollars, but they're going to give you a pretty low exchange rate. So, I mean, it's so easy. There's a joke around, especially Antigua, that Antigua is basically just tourist agencies and restaurants. So they have a really good tourist infrastructure. All those places that Matt mentioned, most of the main streets are lined with shuttle agencies and places that, you can get a shuttle to anywhere you need to get to.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think the tip I would have would be, it's a poorer country, so the infrastructure is not as built up. So I would probably take out more cash. I mean, obviously you want to be safe with it, but I did run into one situation where the ATM wasn't. It would only let me take out 50 equivalent of 50 US. I need to triple that for the next few days, and I was we're kind of screwed, So I would recommend, and there is kind of for some shady ATMs.
Okay.
So if you find a good big bank, I would almost recommend, take out what you need and hide, the rest of it. Don't rely on finding an ATM everywhere you go.
Okay.
Put in your sock.
The locker at the hostel or your hotel room as well. So very cool. Well, gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me this week on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff.
Yes, my guests this week have been Matt Stabile and Luke Armstrong, both from theexpeditioner.com. You can follow along with their adventures on Twitter. Matt can be found at The Expeditioner, and Luke can be found at Luke Spartacus. Gentlemen, thank you once more.
Adios. Thank you.
Thank you.
And ladies and gentlemen, that will just about do it for this week's podcast. Thank you so much for joining me this week. Thank you again to Matt and Luke from theexpeditioner.com for joining us on Set Course for Adventure. If you have any feedback for the podcast, please send it to me at podcast@QiRanger.com. Or if you have any questions, you can send those to me, of course, at questions@QiRanger.com. And if you would like to follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, just look for the QiRanger tag and you can follow me there. But until next time, remember to always be true to yourself and be awesome.